what's up, guys, and welcome to another RPS Best Ball Show. We're joined by a very special guest today, and we'll get to him in just a second. I'm Simon Edwards, and as always, Mitch Snyder is joining us as well. And Snyder, how's it going, man?
Yeah, it's going pretty good. Ready to jump into another show here. I missed you last week. You and Hoop were on the show. It was a good one to go back and listen to. But yeah, I'm looking forward to getting into this best ball show here with Josh, and looking forward to the U.S. Open this week too. I'm gonna have a little bit of best ball going in the U.S. Open as well this week.
Nice. And Josh Larky is joining us today. He formerly of Player Profiler and FTN. He's a very skilled best ball player. I've been listening to his podcast for a couple years, and Josh, you really kind of jumped on the scene with best ball last season, right? Is that when you started doing your podcast?
Yeah, that was. I'm pretty new to fantasy. I was a big sports analytics guy. I worked for 2 different baseball teams prior to deciding that I kind of liked the fantasy sports industry better. And I kind of just hopped into it and just felt like because I had this coding background, I could kind of very quickly experience and research and understand different formats. Started doing best ball 3 years ago and was doing pretty well, and figured, well, as I'm doing well, let's just keep investing this money back into best ball. So the past 3 years, it's basically just been higher and higher volume. So I think last year I ended up doing 700 best ball drafts, and I really think that that volume drafting aspect kind of gives me a unique advantage in not just being in the draft room and understanding the quick clock, but in content creation. I think it's very important, actually, to be able to draft a decent amount when you're trying to create content or doing research. So yeah, I just love best ball. It has become my absolute favorite format of anything football related. It's how I like to spend a free 45 minutes. So, I mean, couldn't be more excited to be here and do a best ball draft on a Monday night. Let's get after it.
Awesome. Yeah, and we're definitely happy to have you here. Josh, with his analytics background, is perfect for this show because we're going to be taking a look at advance rates and the different types of lineup constructions that were successful last year and have been successful in the past that you know people tend to follow when they're doing their best ball drafts. And we had a couple articles recently that kind of took a look into specifically what the percentage of advance rates were for these particular lineup constructions. And the first one, I want to look at is the zero RB. And last year, it wasn't as successful as maybe it's been in the past, or maybe as people hype it up to be. But there was also a situation last season where people were kind of doing it wrong. And by doing it wrong, I mean they were drafting too many wide receivers when ultimately you're putting a lot of capital into wide receiver at the beginning of your drafts, and you want to kind of take it easy and draft the other positions to make up for the equity that you're putting into wide receiver early on in these drafts. And last year they found that Hayden Winks actually did a article over at Underdog and found that the advance rates for the typical zero RB were, let's see, where did I put that? Well, it was under the typical 16.7 standard rate.
I think it was like 11%.
11%, yeah. So it was significantly under that 16.7 standard rate of advancement for those zero RB lineup constructions that threw in way too many receivers, versus teams that had about 6 or 7 wide receivers. They advanced at a 20% rate because they put more investment in later rounds into positions that they were weaker at, like running back and positions like that, like 6 or 7 running backs in a build. Josh, what are your thoughts on this data and what it might say for zero RB drafting in general and the correct way to draft these zero RB teams?
So I've done some zero RB research and just general roster construction research, and mine was a touch different from Hayden's in terms of how I framed the question. I was just in my own little cubicle in my apartment, and I decided zero RB meant no running backs through 6 rounds. So I think he did 7 rounds. I know some people have done 8. I just said 6 rounds because it gave me a good sample size. And I felt like if you didn't take a running back through 6 rounds, that felt 0 RB enough. I'm not a stickler, so if you want to poke holes in why that's wrong, I'm here for it. But I just said if you didn't take a running back through 6 rounds, you're 0 RBing. And I looked at 2020 and 2021 data. One caveat is that there were 3 times as many entrants in 2021 as 2020. It's about 50K or 150. No, yeah, it was about 50K in 2020 and then about 150K entrants in 2021. So about 200,000 entries total that I was observing. And one thing that I found was, in addition to how, like Hayden said, that people are just taking too many receivers, and it's like, oh wow, it's going to look sexy on paper. Like, look at me, I started with 7 straight receivers. Whoa. I mean, sure, it's going to look like your receiving core is going to smash, but then when the draft ends, usually, I like to have one position that looks kind of scary looking. I want one position group to make people squeamish, because then I know that it's getting a little unique and that I've kind of set up that everything else is ready to fire on all cylinders. In this one position group, we're going to need a key injury to those teams' depth charts, and then this team's ready to rock and roll. So that's kind of how I like to set it up. But when you see the 7 straight receiver drafters and stuff like that, you're like, oh, this is low probability. What do we need? We need your quarterbacks to just really exceed ADP. Oh, your tight ends just look like ass as well. And suddenly it's like, okay, well, this team's just not going to advance. And I think that's one of the big issues, is that people took it a little too far. The other thing that I did that I thought was really interesting is I was analyzing how many running backs were on these 0 RB teams. And one thing that I found is that the more running backs that a 0 RB team had, the better the advance rate. However, late in the tournament, it actually switches, and that I found that the teams, if you just aggregate the 2020, 2021 data, 5 and 6 running back teams for 0 RB are more likely to reach the finals, and often more likely to even reach that 3rd round than those 7 and 8 running back 0 RB teams, which I thought was interesting because it is a small sample. Very few teams are getting to round 3 and round 4. But I think it kind of makes sense that when you're going 0 RB, it's like what I said before. You want a position group to make you feel squeamish. And if you, for some reason, take 5, 6, maybe 6 running backs late, it's going to look terrible. And that really what you're going to need is you're going to need 1 or 2 pretty catastrophic injuries ahead of them on the depth chart. And I feel like people don't like to play that game, even though every single year we know that running backs that are drafted early in fantasy, they often go down. We see that every single year. Yet for some reason, people still think, I just need these 7 running backs. When sure, that might help you advance because there's so many running backs, and that you might have the nuts 5 running back build in 0 RB and it doesn't advance and you're pissed off. But at the end of the day, there's no money in advancing. You basically get your entry fee back. So that was one thing that I thought was really interesting, was that, yes, more running backs in 0 RB helps you advance. Fewer running backs in 0 RB, if you can somehow advance that team, actually becomes just an absolute animal. Because suddenly you're going to have no draft capital in running backs, yet for some reason you've got 2 of them that are hitting consistently. And then you still have a ton of wide receivers, maybe 3 QBs, maybe 3 tight ends. So that was one wrinkle that I thought was interesting in terms of just how far you can take 0 RB purely from here's how many players are in each position group.
Yeah, so that kind of follows the old draft like you're right on everything type of philosophy. Because if you're drafting fewer running backs in a situation like that and you're taking them all late, are you typically like targeting strict handcuffs, or are you looking at satellite backs as well? Like what kind of running backs are you targeting in that situation?
So if I do a 5 running back or 6 running back 0 RB build, I probably want 2 guys that I think, and I mean we're when I say that think, because none of us are good at this. Every single year there's so much chaos. We really have no idea like who's ultimately going to hit. But I generally want 2 guys that I think are either a pass catching back or some type of heavily used backup. So in terms of guys that would fit the bill, I mean, you could probably say Michael Carter fits the bill. He's not actually someone I love at ADP, but I think just that kind of profile. Isaiah Spiller is another one where I think he's going to have that quote unquote standalone value. And I think you want a couple guys where even if they do have massive handcuff upside, like a Spiller, that they're hopefully giving you something early on. So I generally like to have 2 to 3 of those guys, but then I want 2 to 3 guys where it's just a pure handcuff. and I'm probably getting either nothing or 15 to 20 fantasy points. And I think that that's really important because if you have 6 James Whites, yes, you're not going to take zeros at running back. But do we really want to construct a team of James White, Naheem Hines, J.D. McKissicks, where you're pretty much just capped out at 12 fantasy points almost every single week, no matter what? And that then if there's some early running back team or someone who hits on a handcuff and they're getting 20 fantasy points from one of their running back slots, now you're 8 fantasy points in the hole at minimum, and it's just impossible to catch up. So for me, that's why I like to do kind of those archetypes. But the most important part of that to me is actually the handcuff. I see people when they do it wrong, they go overboard with the pass catchers. And I'm like, okay, well, yeah, you're not taking zeros, but this doesn't look like a team that's going to win. When are you going to have that 180, 200 fantasy point week from your team? And I think that's why, you would never build a DFS roster where it's just let me have these situational, pass catching backs. That could that hit? Sure. Is that going to hit, especially in half PPR? Very, very rarely.
Right. Snyder, what's your approach typically when you're doing these zero RB teams? Are you kind of following that philosophy too, or how are you approaching this?
Yeah, I liked how he talked about round 6. I think anything after round 6, I think is considered zero RB. And looking at one of my favorite running backs, it's kind of a homer pick, but I've seen J.K. Dobbins fall into that 5-6 range. If I could get him as a number 1, I legitimately think he's got top 10 upside. But I like Elijah Mitchell. We've seen his upside. He's going around ADP in the low 70s. A.J. Dillon's right there. He's a guy that could be thrusted right into the starting lineup. I like A.J. Dillon. He talked about we've got Kareem Hunt there at 100. ADP's going right around. I like James Cook quite a bit this year. I think he could have a breakout year. Some of those guys down there, and then we get into the Chase Edmonds, the Stevensons, the Madisons, Ricard White. These are rookies going to Tampa Bay. I think he could be a guy that could pay off some price tags later on in the year. But I'm typically going for – I like to get 6 running backs. I think if I'm going to do RB0, maybe 7, but typically I'm trying to get in that 6 range. Usually – on most of my teams, I'm trying to get right around that 4 to 5, maybe 6 running backs on a team. 4 to 5 is usually where I try and get to for my median outcome on most of my teams. But if I'm going zero RB, I want to get 1 or 2 more because I think I need some more upside later in the year. So I like some of those guys later on. And I had a ton of Alexander Madison last year, and we saw Dalvin Cook, he started only 13 games last year, so Madison had a few games that were big for me. I think I had Madison on that one team that made it to I was 1 round away from making the final, so I think that was round 3 or something. So I had a couple. I think that might have actually been a zero RB team that had 6 guys, and a few of them caught on late. But I just fell literally. I think that was the week that I needed Dak Prescott to score 0.3 points in the second half of that Redskins game, which is kind of tilting. But yeah, definitely looking for. I think I need to have 6 or 7 running backs from going RB0. I think. Yeah,
makes sense. Some of these other constructions that they took a look at. This was a different article by Jack Miller over at ETR. They took a look at bimodal RB construction, which is basically drafting our running backs in the first couple rounds and then skipping to wide receiver up until round 6 before you even think about drafting another running back. That had a 25.6% advance rate. That was the most successful advance rate out of all these constructions. Hero RB was also successful. That had about a 20.4 advance rate, and that's when you draft a running back in the first couple rounds, and then you don't revisit the position until after round 6 as well, I believe. And Robust RB, which was the popular build from last year, I believe in 2020, it actually won the Best Ball Mania contest, and that had it basically shit the bed with a 14.6 advance rate last season. So there are a lot of reasons why it didn't do so well last season, and the main one is because basically all those first round running backs were hurt for significant portions of the season. You had Derrick Henry got hurt. You had him missing 8 games. You had Eckler. Henry started 8 games. Eckler started 16 games. He ended up as the RB2. So he was drafted in the second round for a large portion of the drafting last year, but he ended up being mid-first round by the end of it. Joe Mixon was also successful, but he played 16 games. But guys like Zeke, he was hurt for most of the season. He was a first-round pick. CMC, he only started 7 games last year. Dalvin Cook only started 13 games, and Kamara only started 10 games. So a lot of those first-round picks were busts. And that would have had a huge reason why Robust RB may have failed so bad last year. But like the beauty of it is nobody's really kind of digging into that. Like it's fallen out of fashion this season, and it might end up being like a sneaky way to kind of differentiate your roster constructions, especially the way that things are shaping up right now. Because you got a lot of these wide receivers that are getting pushed to the beginning of the first round, and finding their ways back in, finding their ways pushing into those first couple rounds. So you're getting a lot more wide receivers that are getting drafted early, pushing those running backs into the third round. So you have an opportunity to draft guys like Christian McCaffrey and Jonathan Taylor in the first round, and then in the turn of the second and third round, you can pick up Saquon Barkley and Javonte Williams and stuff like that. So it sets itself up perfectly for a robust RB type of build. Josh, what are your thoughts with how people are kind of abandoning robust RB this year, and what the implications might be for these other types of builds that are kind of getting hyped up? Bimodal and Hero RB both getting hyped up this year. I'm hearing everybody kind of jumping on that bandwagon this year and kind of pushing those types of constructions.
So I definitely do more of the bimodal and hero RB for my constructions because the advance rates have been pretty good. I think it makes sense why those are going to be fairly good. You have only 2 running back slots, whereas you have 3 receiver slots. So if you're not dedicating too much high draft capital, just 1, maybe 2 picks to fill out those spots, it makes sense that then you're going to start pounding receiver because there are 3 spots to fill out. That being said, we talked about this a little pre-show. I'm not abandoning robust RB, and I think the people that are, that's fine. That's great. I appreciate that you have decided that after 2 years of underdog fantasy and this half PPR scoring and this very small sample size sport we play where 1 or 2 injuries can skew a sample by 10 to 20 to 30%, I will continue to do some robust RB. I've actually found that I've done 2 different ways of robust RB this year that I think actually have made some pretty good teams. One of them is I start off RB times 3. And I've actually liked that with a really early draft slot where if I'm picking at 1, I've had a couple teams where I went Jonathan Taylor, Leonard Fournette, Saquon Barkley. And I love that because all 3 of those guys have the potential to be the RB1 in fantasy points per game. And I mean, if you tell me that all of them play all but 2 to 3 games, that right there, those 3 could just be a ridiculous nucleus. And then I'll generally take 1 more super late running back, just crossing my fingers that this guy does something when there's an injury inevitably to one of those 3 guys for a game or 2. I think that that's been a construction I've really liked just because of the guys that you can get at the turn where there's Fournette, there's Saquon. I just think those guys look like kind of like super backs potentially. We've seen it in the past. It doesn't really fit the profile of what's usually available there. I've done a couple with Javonte Williams where if for some reason Melvin Gordon goes down, you have what looks like the RB1 per game. So I think that that's an interesting one. And then the other one I've done is just kind of picking and choosing where I'll take 3 running backs through 5 rounds or so. So I might take, I've done some where I take a running back in the second and third round. And then I might take, he doesn't go there anymore, unfortunately, but there was about a month where you could get ETN consistently in round 5. And I thought that shaped up really, really well for robust RB in terms of you grab 1 or 2 in the first 4 rounds. ETN is just there in round 5. And then you just wait. Just like with the start 3 running backs, we just wait. And then I'm not pulling the trigger. Even if someone drops, I'm probably not going to take them because I know that it's like what you said. Like you want to draft like you're right. I have my 3 running backs, 2 running backs in the flex. There we go. We don't need any more. And then really late, there's a few guys that I just absolutely love that we'll talk about in a little bit. And then I'll pull the trigger on one of my absolute favorite kind of we'll call them the robust handcuffs, where if the starter goes down, they could be giving you 20 fantasy points a game. So those are the kind of like the two ways I've done it. I've heard some people that are doing 4 running backs early. That one, just from looking at the win rates and just thinking intuitively about how it's like the problem with receiver. If you take too many, you can't start them all. I have a hard time getting on board with the people that are doing 4 running backs through 5-6 rounds. So I think that's just one where I don't think I'll ever get on board with that. But I do love the when the board falls to you, 3 running backs through 5 rounds. I think this year is viable, especially with how the dead zone shifting. Everyone's paranoid about being the guy that takes too many running backs. So I found that I've had some drafts that look very, very good on paper post draft that have been robust RB, even though you're supposed to. Never. Have you seen the win rates? You can't draft robust RB anymore. It's dead. 2 years, dead. So that's one thing I've liked, even though like 2019 was a great year for running backs, but apparently that year can never happen again.
Yeah, exactly. And the first round, like we were saying, like first round was kind of an anomaly last year. Snyder, how are you playing the reactionary type of stuff that's happening with robust RB this year, and your thoughts on those other bimodal and hero RB types of constructions?
Yeah, I think it's kind of getting blown out of proportion. I've seen like a lot of content around the industry saying you can't do the robust and yada yada yada. But I mean, when I come into a draft, I mean, I'm not never going into a draft with one set strategy. I'm just kind of seeing where my picks land 2 to 3 rounds in and see where all the value falls. I mean, and then that's kind of how I start to adjust going forward in rounds like 4 through 8 is depending on where I get my first 2-3 draft picks. Like if there's some value out there, I mean, I'm definitely not going to pass up some good running back value if those guys are dropping. Like I could see like some like a Kamara or a Fournette, or if those guys get pushed down even further. I mean, those guys definitely do have the upside to be top 5 running backs, maybe even top 1 running backs there. So like I'm not going in with like the set strategy. Like I said, I think I'm going to end up doing more robust here, at least early on in the best ball drafts, because I've been seeing a lot more value there. But I definitely do quite a bit with the hero RB2, as I was on that quite a bit last year. That was probably my most targeted draft. That's what ended up happening, because we were getting like Eckler a lot last year, late first, early second. We were just hammering. I mean, we were super heavy on Jamar Chase and some of those receivers last year. So I think that was a construction that I found myself on a lot last year. And I do think I've got some guys that I like in the value running back ranges we'll probably get into here in a while that I think they've got upside to be top 10 guys. So I think if the value's there, I'm definitely not going to shy away from robust, but I think I'm going to be right back on hero as my main option again this year.
Yeah, I think Hero's had a couple years in a row where it's had successful advance rates. So Hero definitely seems to be the optimal, if you could call it that, strategy. Like from the past couple years, there was about 3 years of draft that did these best ball contests as well. I don't know what happened to that data. I don't know if FanDuel just kind of buried it or what. But like I'd like to see a few more years of this best ball data that are able to, kind of merge with these past couple years of Underdog to try to figure more of that stuff out. But one of the other things as far as advance rates that we wanted to take a look at was stacking. And the way you stack showed to have a decent effect on how you were advancing into the second round or third round or to the finals. And Josh happened to do a article about this, going in depth into these different types of stacks and how they affected advance rates. So Josh, why don't you give us an overview of what you found with stacking as far as advance rates?
Sure. So 2 years ago, what I did for stacking research when I was a player profiler was I thought, all right, let's actually just dig into what the preseason, the actual draft stacks were. And I'd say, all right, this team had 2 quarterbacks, both were double stacked. And I had all these different combos, and I was like, let's look at the advance rates. And I think that there was some value to that. Then when I went to FTN this past year, I thought, all right, how can I do something differently? I don't really like just doing my research over again. So I thought, you know what? It would be interesting just to see, rather than what they did during the actual draft, let's see what's just happening in terms of the optimal lineups during the season. Who's actually entering the lineup? And what I found is that not only in the regular season, but in each round of the playoffs, the teams that are advancing through each stage of the tournament have stacks entering their lineup way more often than the teams that were not advancing. And what that tells me is that if you want to advance in the tournament, you should stack. And I think it's pretty obvious for all of us DFS people. I know that RPS is primarily a DFS site. Like we don't need to hit anyone over the head with, oh, stacking is good. But I think it just kind of shows that you don't need to stack. I mean, if there's 55, let's say 55% of teams that advanced were stacking, that means 45% weren't. But it just seemed to me like at every single step of the journey, it is easier to keep advancing if you are stacking. And I think it makes sense. You're just minimizing the bets that you need to get right. And I feel like one thing that I always preach is that where I'm going to be wrong constantly is player takes. So are all of us. Where I'm going to be right much more often is with team level takes. And a really cool piece of research that I did really recently was basically just looking at where the spike weeks come from, team by team. And I think that we'll see if FTN publishes this part in the best ball guide. Who even knows what that guide is going to look like that I put basically a month of my blood, sweat, and tears into. But one thing that I had that I felt was a really good accompaniment to the article that's public and free on FTN was that spike weeks come from offenses we knew before the season were good. And if you look at the teams that are pumping out the 10, 15, 20 fantasy point weeks from wide receiver and tight end, it's all teams we know. And to me, it tells me that, hey, we know that teams that are advancing have stacks, and we know before the season starts which offenses will be good. So what I've tried to do even more this year is I am just pounding those offenses that I know, assuming quarterback health, will be really, really good. And it says to me like, hey, you want to stack Buccaneers. You want to stack Chargers. And I understand some people will go, Mike Evans round 2 is painful. Or Justin Herbert in the 4th, and you want me to stack him with Keenan Allen or Mike Williams in the 3rd? That is painful. Oh, I can't do it. That's just a bad value. And to that I say, well, that's actually where we usually get our player takes wrong. And that what I'm trying to do is I actually take a lot of the player analysis out early on. And I just say, if it's a good offense, I will be stacking it more than the field. I think that's something that I found really interesting just from all the research I've done is that, all right, we know that the teams advancing have stacks entering. And we know just looking at how many spike weeks per team based on receiving cores that the 10 best offenses year after year, when you look historically, before the season, you could have said, yes, that's a great offense because they are always the pass heavy, fast paced teams with good quarterbacks. And I think that's just something that we have to keep in mind is that early on, we shouldn't be playing too much of the ADP game if a player is on a good offense. And that's what I just keep telling myself with these pass catchers is that it doesn't matter if you like T. Higgins ADP or you don't, Mike Evans, you like his ADP or you don't, Mike Williams, Keenan Allen, does not matter to me as much if you like it or you don't. What we know is that the good offenses generate the spike weeks. And we know that the teams that have correlated players hitting at the same time are generally advancing. So for me, that's good enough to say, hey, I'm going to be stacking way more than the field. I'm going to be onslaughting my stacks. And I want to make sure that every single week I'm getting those spike weeks from the good offenses. This might be my favorite stat. The Jacksonville Jaguars had no receivers with 20 fantasy points on underdog scoring last year. They were the only team. Before the season started, they would have been on my short list as one of the teams that wouldn't have it. I think the Giants had one guy. I think it was Tony's one game was their 20 fantasy point week. It just seems to me like when you look, it was like the Bears. Just every single team that was really just generating no spike weeks, we knew before the season. Just like the teams that were good, the top 10, it was like Buccaneers, Chargers, Chiefs, Cardinals. And every time you're going through it, the Cowboys, you're like, oh yeah, of course. Before the season, that quarterback had a high ADP. Those receivers had a high ADP. That is what we are good at. So that's what I pretty much exclusively focus on now in terms of what I want the early core of my team to look like. I have to center it around a good offense. I'm done playing the game of 3 super late round quarterbacks and we cross our fingers. I always want a stud offense with 1, 2, 3 stacked pieces in it within the first 7, 8, 9 rounds.
Yeah, definitely makes sense. I think a lot of people tend to follow ADP a little too strictly to the point where they're making those incorrect decisions, or well, maybe not incorrect decisions, but not making the optimal decisions when it comes to trying to put together an offense that is going to put up a shitload of points throughout the season and potentially get you a league-winning lineup construction. And that's the key takeaway with all this advance rates. It's not necessarily making the right player choices, like Larky was saying. It's more about focusing on your construction and focusing on your stacking. So construction in the making sure that you're kind of following some sort of a pattern, whether it be robust RB or zero RB or bimodal or whatever construction, but also kind of putting that together with stacking and everything like that to build a lineup that's correlated and has the optimal chance of advancing to further rounds. Snyder, what's your kind of take on what Larky was talking about with stacking, and how do you typically kind of approach these teams that people might consider their ADP is too early or it's too expensive to put together some of these super teams?
Yeah, I don't have a problem at all in reaching a little bit here and there to acquire your stacks. Definitely looking to stack, at least get 1 or 2 main stacks in on my teams if that all works out. Sometimes you get sniped and it doesn't work out, but for the most part, I think I'm fairly comfortable getting at least 1 really good stack in there. I kind of started doing a little bit like a contrarian stacks too, like if you do like a QB, 2 receivers, like maybe get their wide receiver 1 and like a wide receiver 3 or 4, and then if you can get like a pass catching RB in there too, I think that's kind of some contrarian ways to get some stacks going. But definitely I'm always looking for, like, I'm pretty high on the Broncos this year. I'm pretty high on a few of these teams like the Chargers, and I'm actually going to be quite bearish on the Chiefs this year. So I think that's a team I'm going to be looking to avoid. I know they're going to be very popular, but I think I'm going to be kind of off of them. I like the Bills from a stacking standpoint as well. I think I might be off of the Vikings, but I mean, as I get into this more, like the Raiders, I think that's an interesting spot. You can get Devontae Adams. I still like Hunter Renfrow quite a bit. I've been on him more so last year in some DFS, and then I was on him some in best ball. I think Hunter Renfrow's going to see some quite open lanes this year too, with Darren Waller there too. So maybe go like a Carr, Renfrow to get contrarian there with that Raiders stack, but definitely looking to get at least 2 pass catchers with all my quarterbacks if all possible, and then adding in some like contrarian stacks. So maybe like some mini stacks. Even if you don't get the receiver, you can get a couple receivers or a receiver pass catching running back. But definitely, I think the stacking is definitely you need to have the stacks on all your teams for sure.
Yeah, for sure, and definitely. Definitely something that you want to kind of pay attention to. I like those Raiders stacks. They're super easy to put together, and they just kind of fall together naturally. I mean, I think a lot of ADP has to do with stacks in general. Like the way that ADP falls to you tends to kind of naturally fit these stacks, and I think a lot of that is obviously because people are trying to focus on their own stacks. So they might not take a Raiders player in a certain position, which kind of sets the ADP up so that you can draft Waller and then draft Renfrow pretty easily a couple rounds later and then eventually get Carr or whatever. But so Raiders are set up perfectly for that because they're all kind of going in later rounds anyways. I think the earliest one of the Raiders is going is Waller, and I think he's going in the 4th round right now. And that's a team that's playing in the AFC West, which is going to be a ton of shootouts this season. So a lot of those... all those teams are basically in contention for the playoffs this season. So let's kind of take this to a draft, guys. If you guys are good to jump into one of these Best Ball Mania drafts.
Yeah, let me pull it up.
If you guys are ready, on the count of 3, maybe we can jump into this thing. Let's go on.
Yeah, I'm ready whenever.
Cool. 1, 2, 3, enter. I got drafting start soon. What do you guys
Shit.
got?
I got 11 more to start.
Oh, no.
More to start. Oh no.
Shit.
Times are tough.
Man,
How much you got left, Josh?
I have 11.
That's what I got. That's what
9. I
mine's
have 9.
saying.
Does yours say 9 now?
It'll probably update maybe.
Here, let me jump into another one. All right, I'll jump in. 9 to start.
Now I'm at 9. Let me
Okay.
refresh and see. I've had that happen before where I'm like, oh no.
That's the
Now it
worst
says
when
waiting
you're.
for 8.
Okay,
that
yeah,
where
that's
you
where
guys
I'm
are
at.
at?
Yeah,
Mine
okay,
says
yeah.
still 11. Where's that?
I'm at 8 right now.
You're gonna get to do a nice little double tip. You're gonna have the fast fingers. This is how I do my cardio sessions. I do 2 to 3 at once.
Yeah, exactly.
I just rapid fire.
Where you're hosting the show too. Like that's let's see. I'm gonna find it up here on my full screen so I can follow along.
One thing that I've also talked about, you guys were like teetering on it, is I've said that a good rule of thumb, especially if you're new to best ball, try to have 2 to 4 AFC West guys on your team, no matter what.
Yeah.
And then at the end of the day, it's going to be hard to go wrong. It's going to be hard to have a bad team if we're targeting the division that has just historically good quarterback play. When Derek Carr is a top 10 quarterback in the NFL and he's maybe by far the worst quarterback in that division, yeah, you want exposure to that division.
Yeah, for sure. I do think that the Raiders are gonna do decent this year. They may not make it.
You guys got left? Do you have one left?
Yeah, one left.
Okay.
Yeah, I
One
got-
thing I've
I'm
also
doing
felt
that.
is I know a lot of people, it's getting trendy to fade Devontae Adams completely. I think he's going to do worse than with the Packers, but when I was doing my projections, just looking into it more, I think it's unlikely we get quite what we got from him last year and the past few seasons, but there's going to be significantly more pass volume there. And while I think the target share comes down, the target share can come down quite a bit and he can still get a similar amount of targets. So sure, it might be slightly, the catch rate might come down, the touchdown rate might come down, but I actually think he can put up pretty similar numbers as I was digging into it more, because the Packers were the slowest offense in the NFL last year.
Yeah, that's
They've
true.
been pretty much the slowest offense year after year. The pass rate hasn't even been that high. So I think there's actually real potential that people are like, oh, he's going to have a 26% target share. And I'm like, well, in this offense, he's only going to lose like 10 targets over the season, like less than 1 a game. So I think he's kind of sneaky in that sense, where I feel like the fade has gone a little too far. I understand you don't want to take him at pick 7, but at the 1-2 turn, I've actually warmed up quite a bit too. I want some exposure there. There's going to be some crazy shootouts in that division. So I think he's a kind of a fun one. And then he pairs perfectly with Waller.
Yeah.
Adams
yeah.
1-2 turn, Waller 3-4 turn.
Yeah. That makes a lot of sense. I'd personally been fading Adams just because he was getting drafted in the same spot that he was getting drafted with Rodgers. But when you put it that way, it makes a lot more sense to draft Adams where he's going right now for sure.
Yeah,
Yeah,
he's not like my favorite value. It's not like I'm like, oh, you
Yeah.
have to draft Adams.
Right.
But I know there's a lot of people that have fully faded him, and they're like, this is a mid to late round 2 pick.
Yeah.
And I think he's fine at the turn. I'm not necessarily super excited to push the button on him there.
Yeah.
But I think that he's actually just a perfectly normal round 1-2 turn pick where he's going to have 160, 170 targets.
Yeah. One guy that I've been trying to draft at the, whenever I can in that second round as far as receivers is Mike Evans. Even when he falls, or even when I fall, like in maybe the 12 or 11 spot, I'll generally try to mix in as much Mike Evans as I can, unless there's obviously a better option there. But trying to get as much exposure to Mike Evans, I think, is a good idea at this point in the off season. I just drafted Jamar Chase. I'm pick 5, by the way, and we got Snyder coming up at pick 9. And Josh, you're pick 11, I believe?
Yeah, that's me.
Okay.
Nice.
All right, so Jamar Chase, I'm kind of trying to start my drafts. Like my favorite draft position is like the 3, 4, or 5 spot, because I want to take Justin Jefferson or Jamar Chase for most of my drafts. I'm not taking very much Cup this season unless he falls after those other 2 receivers, just because I think Kupp is due for some major regression this year. He's got Allen Robinson playing on his team now, so there's like another strong target competitor there. Robert Woods, he was kind of slowing down the last couple years, and then last year he was playing really. He wasn't playing that great in the beginning of the season, so. When he got hurt, he'd only had like one or two big games at that point. So he was just setting the stage for Kupp to have a major season from week one. And now that they have Robinson there, and defenses have a little bit more time to figure out, what the Stafford Kupp connection is exactly. I just don't think that Kupp is going to be able to even come close to what he did last year. Although I don't think he's a bad pick in the first round, I'm taking Jefferson and Chase over him.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the one I'm most enthusiastic about is Jefferson. I think everything sets up for him to have not quite the Cooper Kupp season of last year, but to be that type of player where it's the clear-cut wide receiver one when season ends. Kevin O'Connell was the Rams offensive coordinator last year, so that's kind of just like a nice, cute little nugget for all the people out there that love the storylines, because now he is the head coach of the Vikings. And I think the one thing is that the Vikings have been really run heavy. Dalvin Cook's getting up there in age. He's 27. We've only seen 2 running backs, 27 or older, finish top 10 in fantasy points per game over the last 5 seasons. Only 2 in the last 5 seasons. And I think it's because these running backs, their shelf life is only so many years. Maybe the wheels totally fall off on Dalvin Cook this year. It wouldn't shock me. And then suddenly they have to pass more with a more offense or a more pass heavy coach, since Kevin O'Connell actually has a quarterback background from his playing days. So Jefferson's my favorite, but in general, I like top 5 pick. I think that there's a pretty clear tier gap where you've got JT, CMC, Kupp, Jefferson, Chase, and then I like Eckler at the 6th spot the most, but even then it just feels like whoever you take at 6 feels like a pretty big drop to me from those first 5. So I've always felt like anytime I get a top 5 pick, I high five myself, because it feels like that is the tier.
I agree.
Yeah. So I just took Aaron Jones in the 2nd round there. Let's see. It was messing up on my phone for some reason. It's acting kind of weird. But it just took Aaron Jones as my RB1. I think Aaron Jones, the value's kind of coming out of him a bit. You were able in the beginning to get him more in the 3rd round, but right now he's going mid-2nd round pretty much.
Yeah, I remember he was going, like, I've seen teams posted on Twitter where he was going at the 3-4 turn. I think I've got him on a couple teams in the mid-30s, but yeah, those days are gone.
So let's see.
I took Mark Andrews. Haven't taken any tight ends early in any drafts yet, so I ended up going with him. Definitely a homer kind of pick, but Mark Andrews has been a stud. I think they're going to look for more of the tight ends to be more in the passing game this year with the departure of Hollywood Brown and them not really signing a number 1 wide receiver and them drafting a couple more tight ends. So look for Andrews to see a lot of targets this year again. And Simon, you're up next. Looks like.
coming up next here. This is where I debate on Javonte or taking one of these receivers. And since I have Mike Williams just kind of fallen to me, I'm going to go with Mike Williams in this. That gives me Mike Williams.
Hopefully Javonte falls to me.
Yeah, I have so many teams that are Mike Williams in the 3rd, Herbert in the 4th. I'm from San Diego, so I am that like weird ex-boyfriend where it's like, I'll never forget her. Like the team moved to LA and I'm like, and I was like, I swore off the Chargers and I was like, when Rivers retires, I'm fucking done. And then Rivers retires and I'm like, I'm excited. Let's pop some popcorn and watch Justin Herbert absolutely suck. And then I was like, I'll just watch it for Eckler and a few of the other guys I like watching, Keenan Allen. And then I was like, wait a second. Justin Herbert is maybe like one of the 2 or 3 most exciting quarterbacks in the game. I am back in on the LA Chargers. So I feel like it feels like kind of a homer thing, but I'm like, how do I say no to the team that has just shown for 2 straight years now, the entirety of Herbert's career, that they're fast paced and they like to pass.
Yeah.
I just can't say no when the starting running back is Austin Eckler. You know that they're going to skew pass heavy. It's perfect.
Yeah. And that team is great right now. I bet on them actually to win the AFC back in like March. I think I got like 1100 to plus 1100 on that, and that was before a lot of those free agency moves. And I feel way better about it now. And I think the odds last time I checked on that same site as MGM are plus 800 now, so it got some good value on that bet. I really believe in the Chargers this year. Larky, that the timing just sucked when they moved and they got Herbert. Like, so you move away from your hometown like the year before they end up becoming almost a super team, or a couple years after they become a super team.
Yeah, I think it's tough just when we work in the industry. I only get to see usually like one game live a year. I haven't gotten to see Herbert live yet. It sucks. Yeah. I'm hoping this is the year, but once the NFL season hits, I feel like I'm working crazy hours and I'm doing so much on Sundays work-wise while also juggling my hundreds of DFS lineups that I'm setting, that it's just really tough for me to get to a game.
Let's see. Yeah, the DFS line. I don't know how anybody can kind of map that out when they're trying to enter 150 lineups, and then you get some like late breaking news, like 30 minutes before lineup lock. That's always brutal.
Yeah, for me it would have to be like a Sunday or Monday night game. That's what I would go to.
There you go.
Because it's just, you can't go to one that's on the main Sunday slate. So I feel like I just automatically X those games out because I need my computer with me.
Yeah, I went to Kansas City. I think it was Kansas City or Denver last year to a game. I mean, that was like the most tilting week. I'm in the hotel trying to get all my DFS stuff in, and it was a freaking disaster. I basically just ended up playing like 50 lineups and then one just main cash lineup and some single entries and stuff, but it wasn't anything like I usually do. I mean, it was a fun game and whatnot. I had some great tickets, but I mean, it was super tilting.
I just went with Allen Robinson as my next pick. I was debating on ETN. Deontay Johnson, like for exposure, I'm making sure to mix him in there too. But I'm not super high on him this year, although I think he'll probably be the best performing wide receiver on Pittsburgh. Larky, like what are your kind of thoughts on Deontay versus guys like Terry McLaurin and Allen Robinson this season?
So I was going to talk about that. I hate that area for receivers. Like I took DJ Moore. I have very little DJ Moore. I think when I take DJ Moore, I cross my fingers that Baker or Jimmy G goes there. Because we've already seen Darnold with DJ Moore. We've seen Darnold actually every single year. He's never sustained fantasy production for anybody consistently. But I think they're all pretty bad bets outside of McLaurin. I think it's actually crazy that I've never liked McLaurin in fantasy. I've always been below consensus. This year, it feels like he actually gets the best quarterback play of his life, and the ADP is lower than it's ever been since he had his rookie breakout, which I don't quite understand. So he's my favorite. But with Deontay, I'm like, oh, that whole Steelers offense feels gross. All the research that I've done on these rookie quarterbacks, it's bad news. I know JJ Zacharyson had a really good podcast like 2 years ago, and it was basically, we have yet to see a rookie quarterback support more than one highly fantasy relevant option ever. And it's just the general idea, like when there's a rookie quarterback, you don't pass a whole lot, and the game plan gets more dumbed down. And I just really don't love Deontay. I think the target share comes down. I think the pass attempts come down. With Claypool, I have no idea if he's going to outcompete Pickens. And then with Pickens, I'm like, well, he's already competing with Claypool and Deontay. And then with Freiermuth, I'm like, this dude's like the third, fourth, fifth option. And if you're not the first or second option at tight end, I'm probably going to wait to draft you. So for me, I have almost no exposure to any of these Steelers. That's just one where I go, you know what? I am incredibly confident that rookie Kenny Pickett in that system is going to produce a below average offense especially for half PPR. I think it's going to be low scoring. So that's one that I've mostly faded just because from what I've researched, we know offenses pretty well. That's a tough environment. So the same reason with DJ Moore, I'm like, I hate taking him, but I love the talent. And for me, at least, I'm taking him early occasionally because if for some reason Baker or Jimmy G goes there, we know the ADP shoots up. So that's kind of the idea for me, at least. And in terms of why I would take someone like that, I don't like drafting Metcalf either, but I understand the thesis of Metcalf where if Baker or Jimmy G goes there, the ADP shoots up. So you might as well grab a few shares here and there. But overall, I think it's a bad area for receivers. I don't know if you guys have a favorite one you like. I mean, Cortland Sutton is there now, and I'm like, that feels really high for Sutton, but at least we like that offense. Mm-hmm. And Judy, I'm like, he seems like a terrible half PPR pick, the archetype, but at least we like the offense. So I just think the 3-4 turn, it's always for me like there's a running back I like there, someone like Waller. I've actually taken a lot of Mahomes. I have Mahomes, Swift, DJ Moore, Kelsey. I think the Chiefs are going to take a step back. Mm-hmm. And I think in isolation, I think Mahomes is a terrible pick in fantasy. Actually, I'm not to be on the clock, so I'll say this in a second.
Sure. Yeah, no worries.
Yeah, I think without Tyreek Hill there, I think that a lot of focus is going to be delivered more so on Travis Kelce. I don't think McCall Hardman or any of those other guys have the ability to take over from what Tyreek Hill was able to do, stretching the defense in so many ways, being long. And then last year, he was more so of a shorter ADOT guy last year since teams played him more deeper. But I'm with you and just like completely fading all these rookie quarterbacks this year. I think this is probably the worst year for quarterbacks I've seen in quite some time. I do think that George Pickens is the one guy that I might lean to out of that Steelers wide receiver core there. I mean, he was a stud coming out of high school, tore his ACL in the spring last year, came back in the SEC title game and the national title game. I think he's going to be full strength heading into the year. He's got some pretty big upside too. He's a big physical receiver.
Yeah, if I had to take one, I would take him. So anyway, with Mahomes, I think he's a terrible pick in isolation. I've taken a lot of him because I do think in isolation he's a bad pick. So I think a lot of the less sharp drafters are taking Mahomes, and I can separate myself by I think I'm at least a decent enough drafter that I think I can not. I don't think I'm just flubbing my team by taking Mahomes. And one thing that I like is I actually like the ADPs of these Chiefs receivers. And even if I do not like the ADP of Mahomes as a singular asset, because I like the ADPs of the Chiefs, like I took Kelsey round 1, I think Kelsey is a great turn pick. I understand all the efficiency metrics are going down, but if we look at that receiving core, there is nobody else there.
Right.
You could see, it wouldn't shock me if I think Kelsey was at like 21% of the targets last year. If he boosts back up to 24%, it wouldn't even slightly surprise me, considering that they lost Tyreek Hill and there's no real target magnet left there outside of probably Sky Moore. So he's another guy I like at ADP. Juju, I think, has like kind of a bad ADP, but I'll still take him because I just want Chiefs. But then I like Sky Moore. I like MVS. Mecole Hardman's just like the worst archetype of receiver, but I'll still take him occasionally just because at least he has familiarity with Mahomes. But I like the idea that it feels more condensed than people give it credit for. There's really not that many receivers there to potentially target. I do think they're still going to be a top 10 scoring offense, even if they're closer to 10 than to 1. So it's a weird one where initially I had Mahomes on my fade list. I still do. What I was going to put in the FTN Best Ball Guide, we'll see what this thing looks like, but in my Mahomes write-up, because I wrote up a few paragraphs for every single player in the top 200. And I was like, with Mahomes, he is a terrible pick at ADP, unless you plan to stack Chiefs. And then I think he's a good pick. Because in isolation, I truly believe Jalen Hurts is more likely to outscore Patrick Mahomes this year if we purely go 1-for-1. The problem is Mahomes is way better to stack. So it's this super interesting dichotomy where 12-team league, I'll never draft Mahomes. But in a tournament, I love the idea of Mahomes because of what that Chiefs offense means with the collective ADPs of everyone else. So I don't know if you guys have ever done that before, if there's any teams you like, but I thought it was really interesting where I kind of talked myself out of Mahomes when I did projections and looked at his profile. And then I talked myself into him when I said, okay, but look what it gives me access to with my stacks.
Yeah, I do that more frequently than I should actually, where I go into it convinced that, like a guy is in a worse situation or something like that. But then you start to take a look at other stuff, and you start to kind of convince yourself otherwise on certain guys or whatever, and then by the end of it, you end up going, oh, I got to get him, and then you end up overexposed to him or whatever. The thing that makes me nervous about drafting Mahomes. One sec, I'm just drafting here, guys. Looking at Russell Gage, who I really like, versus
I like
Treylon
Russell Gage
Burks.
quite a bit.
You know, like
You can save him for me. All right, I'll talk about him later. I'll do my Russell Gage love fest monologue later on.
I like him quite a bit.
He is my singular favorite pick right now on Underdog.
Yeah. Well, one thing I noticed is you're sitting there with these options between guys like Russell Gage, who Tom Brady is in love with too. You know, versus Treylon Burks. It's like a rookie wide receiver. I understand his situation. Like, he's going to get a lot of supposedly a lot of targets in that passing game because he's one of the only 2 options or 3 options. Austin Hooper I like a lot. I like drafting Austin Hooper super late in these drafts because let's look at where he was back in Atlanta. Atlanta, he was a stud tight end. He was a league-winning tight end, and then he played with Baker Mayfield for a few years, and it just was not set up for success for a tight end. They had 3 tight ends on that team, and Njoku was getting a big portion of the playing time there. But now Austin Hooper, he's on Tennessee. He's basically the sole tight end. They got rid of Ferkser, so he's set up to have a resurgent season, and he's going in probably the 17th or 18th round right now. So I really like Austin Hooper as an alternative if you're looking to fade Treylon Burks, or if you maybe don't get Treylon Burks and you're trying to build a Dallas stack and you need a run back or something like that for week 17.
Mm-hmm. So I took Sky Moore, and then I took CEH because I'm pick 11, so I had someone in the middle. He had 3 running backs and 2 receivers. So that's why I took Sky Moore a little ahead of ADP and then CEH a little after, as I figured this guy probably won't take 4 running backs. So you never really know what you're going to get with some of these drafters, but that was kind of the idea behind flipping their ADPs. Was I just looked and was like, well, you have a lot of running backs, not a lot of receivers. And this is kind of what I like to do with the Chiefs, is when I take the Chiefs, I take all the Chiefs. Yeah. Because if we think logically, if Patrick Mahomes, I think it's super unlikely. And again, this is why he's a tournament-only play. I think it's really unlikely that he actually nails his ADP around the 40, around the round 3-4 turn. I think it's really unlikely. What needs to happen for Mahomes to pay off in that zone? This offense is fucking awesome. We are getting the best of the Chiefs offense in this whole redo and making them a little less predictable, losing Tyreek Hill. What if for some reason it makes them better? Then I want the Chiefs, which is why at this point I have Mahomes, CEH, Sky Moore, and Kelsey. I like getting I call them the core 4.
Yeah.
Because it rhymes. So I want to get a lot of Chiefs in that case where I don't think there's any world where Mahomes actually hits at that ADP and you're like, oh, sweet. I just had Mahomes, Kelsey, and everyone else sucked. All right, well, I didn't know you were projecting 25 touchdowns for Kelsey. They're probably going elsewhere as well. So I think that for me is how I generally stack the Chiefs. Is I'm not doing like a Mahomes Kelsey or a Mahomes MVS, Mahomes Sky Moore. I'm not doing these single stacks. Mm-hmm. There's just no world where you're paying off at that ADP. So I think that's actually just a good one in general. Is if you're taking Josh Allen, you should probably take a lot of Bills. It's hard to imagine Josh Allen paying off and only one Bill paying off. So that's how I like to think about this, especially with those early round guys.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's the thing with these Chiefs too, is they're all relatively cheap. So you can do that pretty easily, especially if you miss Travis Kelce in those first couple rounds and then you draft Patrick Mahomes. At least you get options with Juju and Sky Moore and MVS later on, who are all relatively inexpensive. So it's easy to kind of put a couple of those guys on there with you.
Yeah, I don't know where you guys are at. My favorite is Sky Moore, because the way I see it is Juju's been on the decline with his yards per route run, targets per route run, all that stuff the past 4 seasons. Travis Kelce turns 33 in October. Mecole Hardman is most likely a certified bust at the NFL level. And then MVS has a career catch rate below 50% and a career high target share of 14% while playing with Aaron Rodgers. And then that leaves Sky Moore, who has one of the most ridiculous profiles that you'll ever see, because he only played 2.5 years in college at Western Michigan and still went round 2. And you don't really see guys that play under 3 seasons go really early on day 2 at receiver from a small school. And then also I know PFF has done stuff, and his yards per route run on like pretty much all the main routes are just out of this world. I think he's the most efficient receiver out of the first 2 rounds drafted, according to PFF, on like 6 or 7 routes aggregated. Sky Moore was most efficient. So there were a lot of reasons where I thought, all right, he seems like the one guy that might be ascending, while everyone else feels more like they're maintaining or descending in the pass catching core. So for me, I've been really heavily exposed to Sky Moore, both in the Mahomes stacks and outside. Because if I'm not taking Mahomes, I'm not really going for like MVS. And there's just guys like that where I'm like, why would I take this if I'm not taking with Mahomes? Sky Moore to me feels like the singular asset I want some exposure to.
I think he has the most upside for sure out of those options, just because Juju, we don't know what to think about. I don't know what to think about Juju as far as his past couple seasons. He had that one good year, his rookie year, where he got those 1,400 yards, but what's he done the last couple years? I know he was hurt last season, but the year before that, I think, is when everybody was drafting him in the second round, expecting him to have this major season, and he just let everybody down, and he hasn't really had like any fantasy significance since then. And then you got MVS. I like MVS. I think that when he had his opportunities in Green Bay, he excelled. But he's another guy that you just haven't seen enough of. So if you're going into a situation where you haven't really seen enough of these guys showing you enough to make you sold on them, then I think Sky Moore makes a lot of sense, because it's like, if you're going to take a mystery box, you might as well take the box has the potential to explode,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree. I mean, he's got the measurables, 5'10", 195. I mean, he had some really good games that not so good school. I mean, he, like you said, he was a freshman and sophomore. He's putting up numbers as a freshman there. He had 51 catches for 800 yards, averaged almost 16 yards per reception there. And then he improved the next year, not on a yards per average standpoint, but from a total yards per game. He had almost 1,300 yards over 12 games. So I definitely think Sky Moore's definitely got the big upside there. I was trying to get a stack there, and someone just took Hunter Renfrow from my double stack. Kind of don't really like any of these guys here. I think Christian Watson may have the biggest upside here. I like Jameson Williams a lot. I just don't know how healthy he's going to be going into the season. I think he could miss 4, 5, 6 games, but I think Jameson Williams has the biggest upside of any of these rookies coming into the NFL going forward for career-wise.
Mm-hmm. I think he's the home run play, Jameson Williams. I've been sprinkling him in, but I'm trying not to be overexposed to him.
Yeah, same here.
Yeah, I want to be pretty high on him, but not like overly high.
Like if he was fully healthy, I would almost be targeting him as much as I was targeting Jamar Chase last year. I don't think he's as good as Jamar Chase. Like coming into last year, I said Jamar Chase was the best receiver I'd seen coming into the NFL since Julio Jones. Jameson Williams isn't quite on that caliber, but if he was 100% healthy, I think he would be like 80% of what I thought Jamar Chase was coming into the year. But hopefully he can make a speedy recovery and have a big season this year.
Yeah. That was another situation I was just in with Ramondre Stevenson, where I'm faced with choosing between him, Rashad Penny, and Chase Edmonds. And I like Chase Edmonds and I like Ramondre, but I ended up going Ramondre there just because I think he showed a lot of good flashes last season. Edmonds, we've seen him show flashes in the past. He never really breaks out, but I think Ramondre is kind of going into his second year, has the opportunity to have a breakout season. I'm trying to in my 150 puppies, I'm doing 150 like basically slow drafts on the puppy right now. So my phone keeps malfunctioning on me every time I try to draft somebody. It's like it freezes on me, and I'm like, God damn, I can't. I end up having to go to my my screen on my desktop and draft my guy. But basically, my strategy with 150 slow drafts in the puppy is I'm trying to spread it out as long as I can, right? Because when you're drafting in the puppy, you're drafting within a certain window of time, as we all know. But if you're drafting on slow drafts, you can extend your draft about like a month plus, right? So if you have that extra month of taking in all that information and everything, you have an opportunity to differentiate your lineup significantly from the field by stretching it out like that. And getting all that information and everything like that, I think, is a huge edge in a contest like that. Let's see, it's my turn to draft.
Yeah, that was something that I really liked that you mentioned, because I hadn't thought about it quite as much like that. And I think it is a unique advantage where only the slow drafts present you with the ability to get different ADPs than the entirety of the rest of the tournament. Because I've always thought about maxing the puppy as I've seen a lot of the fast drafters max it. I'm like, wow, you are just ridiculous. How did you do 150 fast drafts in 2 weeks? Is this your full-time job? Best ball. That's impressive. But I hadn't really thought about the 150 max the way you did it, where you're slow drafting and that you're going to get fundamentally completely different ADPs than everyone else. Since I've always liked the slow drafts, I think I'm in like 30 in the puppy, because I think the competition's often soft and that you get these people that are too timid to do the 30-second clock. But I like that idea that not only would you get people that are maybe too timid for the 30-second clock, but you're also just getting different ADPs, and that your roster will look so fundamentally different from everybody else's in that tournament.
Yeah, exactly. And the information that you're getting in that like extra month or however long you could drag it out, you got to make sure that when it's your turn in that slow draft, though, that you're letting every second, not every second, but you're waiting until, maybe the maximum of 1 hour left before you draft, because you get 8 hours per turn when it's in the slow draft. So you want to try to milk that clock as much as you can, just to kind of stretch that draft out as much as possible. It probably drives people in my drafts nuts, but the whole point of doing those slow drafts for me is to try to gather as much information that the people in the fast drafts did not have, that you have an edge to take advantage of there.
I'm up here in one pick. I just took Ricard White right with James Cook. I mean, both Ricard White and James Cook averaged over 10 yards per catch last season. Cook had 700 rush yards. Ricard White had over 1,000 yards rushing last year, averaged 5.5 yards a carry. I think Ricard White out of the backfield pretty much everywhere is going to be pretty upside there in that Tampa offense. So I like both of those rookie running backs.
Yeah, my two favorite rookies in this range, running back wise, are White and Spiller, just because we know they're good offenses. We know that these guys are competent. Pass catchers are better. In which case, White was deployed outside very frequently in college. That's why he has over 10 yards per reception and nearly 500 receiving yards as a senior. I just really like that profile where they can be an absolute super back if the starter goes down, because you can I like doing that thought experiment where if the starter goes down, what are these fab bids going to look like in these more casual leagues or leagues where the roster size is small? Everyone's going to be bidding 100% of their fab. If Eckler goes down for 4 games, or if Fournette goes down for 4 games, if for some reason Spiller or White's on waivers, it's going to just be a feeding frenzy. So that's why I like targeting the running backs like that, where I just think, all right, if the starter goes down, what is the hype going to be like? Yeah, I probably want that guy.
Definitely. Simon's up right now drafting. Who you got? You got 3 running backs so far.
Yeah, I like Jalen Tolbert a lot here.
I was looking at him.
I do have Schwartz on my team. I got a really good value on Schwartz, by the way.
Schultz, you got him 2 rounds after, yeah.
Yeah, I got him. Something like 20 ADP spots past where he was going. So anytime, like, I notice when I'm doing all these slow drafts, you'll notice a lot of times that you'll get those opportunities where you're able to differentiate your lineup or get diversity in your players you're drafting by taking these guys that are going 10 to 20 spots after their ADP. If you're looking to get exposure to a certain set of players, it makes a lot of sense when you get those opportunities to draft them like well past their ADP. It gives you a differentiation not only in your lineup, but it gives you the diversity in your. It gets you to hit your exposure targets. Sorry, I'm just concentrating on my next pick here.
Yeah.
I'm looking at my potentially my second quarterback here. I think I want to go with Lawrence because I think there's still opportunities to grab some of these Jaguars as my second stack.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's Watson right behind him. For me, I've drafted pretty much no Watson.
Yeah.
The way that I see it is that quarterback's the highest scoring position. It's half PPR. So relative to PPR, every position scores less except for quarterback. And he's going to miss like at least half the season, maybe more.
Yeah, I think
so, like,
at minimum.
You're just, it's painful because you need to do a 3 quarterback build.
Right.
And you know that one of them isn't scoring for at least like 8 weeks or more. We don't even know if he's going to be that good on the Browns. They're going to be run heavy potentially. I think he's just a tough pick for me to make.
Yeah, I was going heavy on him in the beginning, but like as the when he didn't get any criminal charges against him, I felt like, okay, so we're probably looking at like an 8-game suspension as opposed to like the entire season. And I thought that it made a little more sense then, but like as this news just keeps getting worse and worse for him, and his lawyer's an idiot. His lawyer's like talking about happy endings like in public. It's like, dude, what the hell are you doing, man? You're already losing the PR war, and now you're talking about fucking happy endings. It's like, what? How much worse could the situation get for Watson at that point? So that I'm kind of bailing on like even. Considering it at this point, I think he's a sell. Mm-hmm. I just don't see the upside with his situation, right now.
Yeah, I always try and think about like what do I think is realistically going to happen at the low range of outcomes in terms of a suspension or anything like that, and then how will that ultimately? Oh, I'm on the clock. I love Kenny Gainwell. There's another Gainwell share. I can't stop drafting the pass-catching running backs who have gotten goal line work in the past. That is where the fantasy points come from. So if he got some of that as a rookie, who knows what could happen in year 2, but I like it. So what I like to do is the thought experiment of if this guy gets this suspension, what happens? And it's why I have very little Kamara right now. Mm-hmm. And I could be wrong, but I'm assuming he gets 4 games. It just feels like maybe gets 4. I mean, maybe gets 6. It was felony battery. That sounds to me like there's going to be something. If he was actually charged with a felony, he's probably going to get suspended for some amount of time. Mm-hmm. I think back to like Zeke missed 6 games for domestic violence when he actually had no criminal charges. So I understand like the public hates domestic violence. I hate domestic violence, but at the same time, I'm like, well, Kamara's a felony. This needs something. So I'm like 4 to 6 games. Let's say that even if he gets no suspension. What's the ADP going from? Late second to round 1-2 turn?
Right.
So I'm like, I'm not even missing out that much. And I think he's pretty much guaranteed to get like these 4+ games. And if he does that, then he falls to like the 3-4 turn potentially. Why would I get him now when I don't feel like the upside's that great if he doesn't get suspended?
Yeah.
When I'm like, he's most likely, I think it's pretty much guaranteed to get some suspension for the felony. I'll just grab him at the 3-4 turn. So I kind of plan on being heavily exposed to Kamara in the month of August because I know his hearing is August 1st.
Yeah.
My plan is to have basically no Kamara right now and then to have like 20 to 30% Kamara in my August drafts to make up for it because I'm getting him at the 3-4 turn. So that's kind of how I've walked through it logically. I might be totally wrong on that, but that feels to me like the best way to play it, the way that I've thought about it. So let me know if I'm just off on this one. But that was the thought experiment.
My hesitation with Kamara is I believe it was on video. Like, so if he's on video kind of committing a felony or whatever, I just think that there's less that the NFL can do as far as trying to manage it from a PR standpoint. So I think that if it is on video, supposedly like the victim claimed that there's a video of it or something. I just don't. It's kind of like the Ray Rice situation, like a few years back, right? Is at first it was just like, oh, he got in a scuffle with like his wife or whatever, right? And people weren't making a huge deal out of it, but as soon as the video like came out and you actually saw like him like punching his wife, it's like, holy shit, so there was nothing that could be done at that point. It's just like, you got to suspend it, you got to kick the guy out of the league or whatever, so I just think that the impact of video evidence, if Kamara, like with him going like that expensive as well, like going in like the second, third round, if he was going like in the 8th round or the like the fifth or beyond, like let's say, kind of like DeAndre Hopkins, like he's got a 6-game suspension, he's still going in what, like the 7th round, because people realize that you get 10 games out of him in the season, it's still worth it to draft him that late. With Kamara, you're potentially thinking like a 4 to 6 game suspension. Drafting a guy in the 2nd, 3rd round with that many potential like lost games, like for me, it's too risky. If he was closer to the like maybe the 5th round, I think it would be worth the risk, but a little too risky for me. But that's if that video exists. If he ends up getting like no suspension, or they end up like kind of pushing it to next season, then that's definitely worth the risk.
Wow, I was sweating that Hamler pick. So now I have this big Week 17 correlation, because I know, like we talked about, people do Kansas City, Denver, they love it. I don't think they do enough of it. I don't think they do the combinations I'm doing. So now I've got Mahomes, CEH, Sky Moore, Mecole Hardman, and Kelsey, running it back with Tim Patrick and KJ Hamler. So I feel like I'm set up for some type of massive correlation if I'm one of the 0.1% of the teams that makes it to Week 17. So whenever I talk about it, I'm like, well, this team's dead anyway. Why am I even thinking about it? But if for some reason I'm part of the 0.1%, then I've got that stack. So
yeah, that's usually what I do. Like if I get like midway through a draft and I hate how my correlation's going, or I don't have like the correlation I'm looking for or whatever, I just hate the draft, man. I'm just like miserable. Here I got a little bit of correlation. I got the Burrow Chase stack.
Son of a bitch.
Snyder. And I'm running it back with Jamison Crowder. I'm not going crazy on like Week 17
Snyder's trying to build that late round
I was trying.
backdoor stack. I see this one.
He just freaking sniped me.
This dude's on auto draft, I think. Look at his team. He's got the red shield, but I think he might be on auto draft based on the positional allotment.
He took Hayden Hurst from me too. I was planning on grabbing Hayden Hurst.
I feel like he might be auto drafting off his ranks. Anytime I see like a Darren Waller or an early round tight end with 3 tight ends, I'm like,
oh yeah,
is this person auto drafting off the ranks they put in? Because their receiving core is very thin right now, which makes me think if they went 3 tight end with that receiving core, they might be auto drafting off ranks. Maybe not, and I'm just not aware of this optimal strategy. But I don't know if it was anything personal. I think they might just be on auto draft.
Yeah.
See now you can tell that the public sentiment is way swung against Deshaun Watson at this point. He's going at like we're at 188 and he still hasn't been drafted. I'm not even like tempted to draft him right now either.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I've seen him go as far as about 200. So we could actually be we could get there. I've seen him go like 199-ish or 198 in a couple of
got him on a team or two that late, like earlier, like a month or so ago.
Yeah, I think I took him on one team last week in the 190s where I was like, looks like this is like my second Watson share. All right, I guess I have him at 190 because then at least it's palatable as a 3 quarterback build.
Mm-hmm.
If you know, like if he's missing half the season, but he might give you like, I think especially if you're doing like junk quarterback and you're like, let me take 3 late round quarterbacks. I think that's when he's best deployed right now is if you can get him super late, then you have 3 late round quarterbacks, but it doesn't look like a late round quarterback team come the tournament. But I mean, maybe he just missed the whole year. So I really just have no idea what the NFL's thinking.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think it'll be interesting to see if it gets held up in like litigation or whatever that would push it into next year. It's interesting.
The only thing that he has going for him right now is that there were no criminal charges. You know, like, because that's a huge piece of the puzzle. You know, because it's just if the court couldn't find him guilty, then I think that, or couldn't find him as being put on trial or whatever or punished, then the NFL's got to look at that and go, okay, you know, we can cave into, you know, basically a PR he said she said type of thing, or we could, you know, stand with the player. And, you know, obviously the NFL wants to kind of lean towards giving the players the benefit of the doubt, but obviously the PR at this point is so bad against them. Like, I just don't see how they cannot suspend them for almost the whole season, if not, you know, at minimum half, you know?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm also curious, just, I don't know if we'll be able to get access to the numbers. I should have screenshotted the front office. I'm curious. I think all the women are just going to quit if he's playing most of the season. I feel like the front office, everyone that has a strong feeling on it would quit, and it wouldn't shock me. Where, especially like if you're in marketing or something and you're tasked with making constant promotional videos with him, that doesn't seem like the dream job, based on what he's done. So I think there could just be these massive ripple effects. And I mean, like the salary of giving him like $1 million for year one kind of tells that they know it's going to be bad this year.
Well, that's you know, like that goes to the timing of the suspension too, because like the NFL has to make a decision soon, because the Browns they got to put out their seasonal promotion stuff. You know, they got to know if they need to feature Watson on ads and you know, there's all sorts of logistical stuff like that the Browns are going to have to deal with, and they're in that window where they have to start making these decisions, and the NFL kind of holding this decision is not good for that whole situation. So I would lean towards a decision coming out in the next like week or two. Like I can't imagine them like dragging it out any longer. I think the PR has just swung so far against them at this point. It's like it makes the decision easier for the NFL at this point, I think.
So I finished my draft. I now have I kind of backdoored a Washington stack at the end. I don't even love this team, but I mean, there's this talk of a McLaurin holdout. I don't think anything's going to come of it, but I was like, for some reason, if something comes of it, why don't I grab Dotson in the 130s? So I grabbed him, and I was like, all right, Wentz is kind of a good second quarterback. I don't like taking a quarterback too early for number 2 when I have Mahomes. So I was like, this will set up Wentz. And then my final 2 picks, it kind of fell in my lap after I had Wentz and Dotson. I finished with Brian Robinson in round 17 and then Logan Thomas in round 18. So it looks like I'm invested in the Chiefs and the Commanders for this team. But that's kind of how I like to do it. Like I said before, I like to aggressively stack. I think the people that are interpreting stacking articles with the single and double stacks hitting in most weeks as you have to single or double stack, I'm trying to actually score points the whole season. Mm-hmm. And one thing I've done a lot of research on is like that negative correlation within weeks, where if I have a ton of Chiefs or a ton of Washington players, there's a good chance something's happening. There's some touchdown going to one or two of these guys each week. And that it just helps you fill out your roster week to week, because you ultimately have to get through those 14 weeks. And also, like, yeah, single or double stack's going to hit in the tournament. I don't really know which guy. So, I mean, maybe Kelsey just shits the bed, well, that's okay because I've got Sky Moore and Mecole Hardman and CEH. Maybe McLaurin doesn't do very well. Cool. I've got Dotson. I've got Logan Thomas. So I like to do it that way where I generally find myself onslaughting and that I'll have double, triple, quadruple stacks in a lot of these entries.
Yeah. Snyder, why don't you go through the team that you ended up with and your correlations and stuff?
Yeah, this is probably the worst team I've drafted so far. Kind of everything went against me there towards when I was trying to draft guys, but I've got mini stack with Derek Carr and Devontae Adams. I've got another stack with Davis Mills, Brandon Cooks, and Brevin Jordan, and then I've just got Daniel Jones in there because the other two quarterbacks were week 6, so I had to get another quarterback in there, and Daniel Jones has pretty good upside for where I got him. I think I got him at 177, which is about 15 picks over ADP. Went with J.K. Dobbins, Elijah Mitchell, James Cook, Ricard White. So a lot of younger guys for my running back backfield. I like the upside of Dobbins. I think it looks like he's going to be fully healthy coming into the year. So I like him to be, last year he was getting touted as possibly a top 10 running back. I think he's got that upside still. We saw Elijah Moore's upside, and I really like James Cook and Ricard White's dual threat out of the backfield. And we saw White tally over 1,000 yards rushing the ball last year for Arizona State as well. So I like that. And then I went with a lot of upside guys for my receivers. I got Jalen Waddle, Treylon Burks, Christian Watson, Van Jefferson, Josh Palmer, and then Odell Beckham. I'm not sure what's going to happen with Odell yet, but I got him real late, so happy with that. And then I got Mark Andrews and Tyler Higbee as tight ends as well.
Yeah, I like that Odell pick late in these drafts. You're set up to get Will Fuller, Odell Beckham, and Julio Jones all super late in these drafts. Any one of those dudes could end up in a really good situation, and then his ADP is going to skyrocket. Odell probably going to miss, half the season?
I bet he'll miss, 4 to 6 games for sure, I think. Yeah, possibly up to 8 or 9.
Mm-hmm. So, if you're drafting him in the 17th, 18th round, you're basically, if you're drafting a player in the 17th, 18th round, if you get 2 weeks where he ends up in your starting lineup, then you're in good shape. So if Beckham is playing, let's say, 6 or 7 games, there's a good chance that, maybe 3 or 4 of those games that he could end up as one of your highest scoring wide receivers. So I think it's a really good value getting him that late, even though he's going to be missing games for sure. We don't know exactly where he's going to end up. I know the Rams have been trying to get him, they're trying to work it so that they can get him back. So we'll see what happens there. But you got Will Fuller too. Will Fuller missed all of last season with injuries, and we all know his upside. Don't know exactly where he's going to end up. I haven't heard any buzz or any rumors or anything like that. I don't know about you guys. Have you guys heard anything on Will Fuller?
I have no idea because I feel like the rumor initially was, he wants to play with Watson.
Yeah.
But now it's like, well, even if he's on the Browns, he might not play with Watson this year.
Right.
But what I do like is that these guys are all established enough that I don't think they're coming back to play for some piss poor offense.
Right.
Like the Fuller, Julio, OBJ, those 3, they're going to want to play for a good team. And that's one thing I like. And I'm with you. Like where you're taking these guys, you're taking them late enough. Let's say that they miss 12 games. They can still pay off missing 12 games. Or if they sign with a team mid-season. Because really, when you're taking a guy as your last or second to last receiver, you can have a really good team where your final pick never enters your lineup. In fact, a lot of good teams, the final couple picks never enter their lineup because they just nailed the middle of their draft. So that's why I think that they're pretty strong picks, and why I often like, all else equal, if I think a guy has a lot more upside compared to other guys late in the season, considering that's where the money's made, those are players that I'm often going to target because of that.
Yeah, and I
think Will Fuller could. Yeah. I think Will Fuller could land in maybe Tennessee or something. I think with them losing A.J. Brown and Will Fuller and then Treylon Burks, you get both of those guys on the outside. There could be some pretty explosive offense there with if Henry can stay healthy too in the backfield.
Well, Green Bay too. Like Green Bay,
Yeah.
let's not forget that Green Bay kind of earmarked like a huge chunk of change for Devontae Adams to come back. You know, like
True.
they were ready to sign him to a 20 million plus deal before he ended up signing with the Raiders. So if they were able to clear that much cap space for him, I would imagine that they could easily pick up one or two of those guys. Like on top of maybe even like a Terry McLaurin or DK Metcalf could still end up on Green Bay. It's still remains to be seen how those situations play out. But it would make a lot of sense, like if they were able to offer what they were offering Devontae Adams to a guy like DK Metcalf. I think that would make a lot of sense, and he would probably be more likely to accept a deal like that. I don't know. But for my team, I ended up with Joe Burrow and Trevor Lawrence as my quarterbacks, Aaron Jones, Breece Hall, Ramondre Stevenson, Khalil Herbert, and Zamir White as my running backs. My wide receivers, I got Jamar Chase, Mike Williams, Allen Robinson, Russell Gage, Chris Olave, Jamison Crowder, Jalen Tolbert, and Zay Jones. Little correlation there with Trevor Lawrence. And then I got Dalton Schultz at a really good value. I got him 21 spots after ADP. Evan Ingram for that Trevor Lawrence correlation, and then Taysom Hill, who has a tight end designation this season. So that's interesting on Underdog there. But yeah, it was good drafting with you, Josh, and good to have on the show. How can the viewers find your work and keep tabs on what you got cooking for the future?
So first off, thanks you guys. This was a nice marathon episode, a lot of fun. Good to talk some best ball. Good to get another best ball rep in on Best Ball Mania. And everyone can just find me on two places: Twitter at JLarky Tweets and TikTok at JLarky TikTok. So JLARKY. And I'll have more announcements coming soon in terms of where I will be taking myself in this industry. I've got what I think is going to be a really, really awesome opportunity lined up to begin at the start of July. So we'll not be announcing anything this week. Most likely won't announce anything next week either. But come very end of June, early July, that is where people will be able to find my work. But until then, I'm just enjoying a June vacation. I'm doing about 3 to 4 hours of something productive each day. And then the rest of the time, I'm just working out, walking the dog, cooking. It's been nice.
Definitely earned it, man. Like after all those number crunching and writing all those articles and everything, getting everybody up to speed on all these different best ball quirks and whatnot. So it's cool to have you on. And I'd like to remind our viewers too, if you haven't signed up for Underdog yet, if you sign up using the promo code RUNPURE, you can get a $100 match on your first deposit up to $100, and that'll get you a bunch of entries into either the puppy or the Best Ball Mania. It gets you 4 entries into that. So make sure you're jumping in on that and taking advantage of that free money. It's always good to get a ton of these drafts in just so that you can get familiar with the ADP, especially if you're trying to max enter this stuff. So make sure to get in those contests. Use the cheap ones first to get familiar with that ADP before you jump into the $25 contest, just so you can maximize your bankroll too. So thanks again, Josh, for joining us. It was fun having you, and take care, everybody. We'll see you next time.